Never in a million years would fans have guessed this is how it would all end for Brian Wilson. The voice that gave us some of the most iconic music in American history, gone in a way that almost no one saw coming. But the most shocking part? It's not just how he died. It's what happened in the years leading up to his death. And the deeply disturbing details that have been kept quiet. Until now. Brian Wilson was a musical genius. That's not up for debate. The Beach Boys wouldn't have been the Beach Boys without him. Songs like God Only Knows, Wouldn't It Be Nice, and Good Vibrations weren't just hits. They were cultural moments. But behind all the harmony and sunshine was a man battling some serious demons. In this video, we're breaking down the shocking truths about Brian Wilson's death. Some of this stuff is hard to hear, especially if you grew up loving his music. But these are facts the public deserves to know. We're talking about legal battles, possible elder abuse, and a heartbreaking decline that could have, and maybe should have, been stopped. So let's dive into what really happened. For starters, Brian Wilson didn't die in some wild or dramatic rock star way like you might expect. There was no overdose, no late-night scandal. In fact, the official reports painted it as relatively uneventful. But the truth is way more complicated. In the final years of his life, Brian's health was failing, and not just physically. Mentally, he was falling apart. His wife, Melinda Ledbetter, passed away in January 2024. And that was the beginning of the end. For decades, Melinda had been Brian's rock. She managed his life, his career, and most importantly, his health. When she died, the fragile structure holding Brian together started to crack. And it cracked fast. Just 1 month later, his family filed for a court conservatorship, claiming Brian was suffering from a major neurocognitive disorder. Let that sink in. One of the most brilliant minds in music history couldn't even manage his own daily routine anymore. But here's where things start to get dark. Brian had already been through one conservatorship back in the 1990s, when his shady therapist, Eugene Landy, basically took over his entire life. That situation ended in scandal and lawsuits. And now, decades later, history was repeating itself. This time, it wasn't some outsider taking control. It was his family.
So what went wrong?
According to court documents, Brian couldn't make simple decisions on his own. He was confused, anxious, and emotionally fragile. Friends said he'd sit in silence for hours, staring out windows. He barely recognized people. He forgot lyrics. He forgot family members. And it all happened quickly after Melinda's death. Some fans questioned why his children moved so fast to put him under legal control. Others said it was the only way to protect him. The real answer might lie somewhere in between. When someone with that much money, fame, and legacy becomes mentally unstable, things get complicated, fast. Because Brian Wilson wasn't just a person, he was a brand. He had royalties, song rights, publishing deals, and licensing agreements that raked in millions every year. If you think everyone had pure intentions, think again. Let's talk about the financial side for a second. After Melinda died, people started circling Brian like vultures. Old acquaintances, industry figures, distant family members, everyone wanted a piece of the empire. And that's when red flags started popping up. One shocking report claimed that in the months after the conservatorship was established, several of Brian's unreleased recordings were quietly being prepped for licensing and sale, almost like someone was getting ready to cash in while they still could. Fans weren't the only ones raising eyebrows. Former colleagues in the industry started speaking up. One anonymous producer who worked with Brian in the early 2000s said, quote, "The people around him aren't protecting him, they're positioning him." Think about that. They weren't protecting him, they were positioning him. There's no proof of criminal activity, no smoking gun. But when you look at the timeline, things feel off. By mid-2024, Brian was almost completely withdrawn from public life. His once vibrant interviews became short, rehearsed statements. At public events, he needed assistance walking and rarely spoke. Then came the final blow. In early 2025, Brian was hospitalized for what was initially described as a non-life-threatening condition, but he never came out. Within weeks, the announcement came. Brian Wilson had passed away. No dramatic headlines, no messy scandals, just a quiet ending to a chaotic life. But let's be real, the most shocking part isn't just the death itself, it's what he went through in those final years, and how little we actually know about it. There are a few things people close to Brian have since revealed, and they paint a heartbreaking picture. Apparently, Brian often asked for Melinda in his final days. He didn't understand she was gone. He'd ask his nurse when she was coming back. He'd call out for her in the middle of the night. If that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what will. And then there's the estate drama. Shortly after his death, his children and former bandmates started arguing publicly over the rights to his music. Who owns what? Who gets royalties? Who can authorize licensing? Suddenly, it wasn't about honoring Brian. It was about money. Even Mike Love, who had a famously rocky relationship with Brian over the years, issued a strangely timed press release about possibly reviving old Beach Boys recordings. It didn't sit right with fans. You know what else didn't sit right? The lack of transparency from Brian's family. They've kept most of the medical and legal documents sealed. We don't know exactly what Brian was diagnosed with. We don't know how much control he really had over his final decisions. And we probably never will. It's not illegal, but it raises questions. Because when you're a legend like Brian Wilson, your story doesn't just belong to you. It belongs to music history. And fans deserve honesty. The saddest part is that despite all the success, all the legacy, and all the love from fans, Brian's final years were spent in confusion, silence, and grief. And yet, somehow, even in that state, the music still lived inside him. One caretaker said that even in his worst mental moments, Brian could still hum the melody to "God Only Knows." His mind was slipping, but the music never left. That's the real tragedy. That someone so brilliant, so influential, could be reduced to a shadow of themselves because the systems around them didn't know how to protect them, or didn't care enough to try. Brian Wilson deserved better. But at the very least, we owe him the truth. The truth about his struggles, the truth about how he was treated, and the truth about the people who were supposed to be in his corner. Rest in peace, Brian. The world may have failed you in the end, but your music never did.